see.
There's this option.
Video allow. Let's see. I don't see that option.
So next to share screen, there should be an arrow, and if you click it, you will be allowed to do that. Another option would be to go to participants and make me a host.
Yes, I will do that as a matter of fact.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, you are now the host.
Perfect. Thank you. Share screen.
Mark, you know Alexander, right?
Yeah, he's a regular participant in our Wheel of Shakespeare.
There we go. Whoa.
All right. So, I assume you're both familiar with the play. I know that you're both experts in Shakespeare. And what I usually do when I discuss works of literature is I basically Google the name of the book, or in this case the play, and plus discussion questions, and there are numerous websites that pop up, and I just tackle the questions one by one if I like them. And we could try the same thing with Richard II, if you don't mind.
Well, that's neat. That's one of my favorites. One of Shakespeare's most underrated, in my opinion.
I loved it when I read it.
I'll be honest. I don't see what the big deal is about this play. I've read it. I've gone through it. I don't see it.
Oh, the language is just gorgeous. So even if you forget, if you completely ignore what's going on there, you just see this amazing English.
I just don't see how it stands out amongst all his other plays. I don't say it's a bad play. I just don't. I don't see what's so remarkable about it. I'm not criticizing.
My big thing is.
It's just me.
I mentioned how I'm fascinated by the character of Bolingbroke, and I say that it's disappointing that you don't see his. You have to see all four. You have to see the progression of his character throughout the series to see his character arc. That's why I put together that thing, and I mentioned that I shared it where I condensed it. Richard II along with Henry I, Part 1 and 2 to be a play that just focuses on that character and
well, technically, this is the first play in Shakespeare's second tetralogy, also known as the Henriette.
Yeah.
So you have from Richard II up to King Henry V, and you have similar characters and developments and so on. And a surprising fact is that there are so many figures of speech present in this play in particular. Researchers have found over 150 types thereof in Richard II. And this is a lot. So even for Shakespeare. This shows that in the past, especially in Shakespeare's time, writers and they studied rhetorics. So as opposed to some kind of modern art wherein you have especially painters that draw something maybe even without thinking what they're drawing, and they say, okay, this is art. But in the past, it wasn't like this. They studied how to do it. They put a lot of effort into it, and the result speaks for itself. And we can now begin, if you would like. So in this website, we have some quotes by different literary critics, and we can agree or disagree with them. Richard in prison remains the same person as Richard on the throne. Dowden. Do you agree?
Yes.
And why?
Because he was he was born into the throne. He feels a sense of entitlement, and yes, he's adjusting to psychological, emotionally what's happening to him. But I think he never allowed the doubt that he's being robbed of something that he's entitled to, that God chose him to be king, and that it's human meddling that's interfering with that.
Yeah, I'd say that he
I'm
never.
oversimplifying.
I'd say he never, in terms of, is, I think the question is focused on, is he a flat no arc character, or does he change? And it kind of depends on whether the question refers to his circumstances, where of course, yeah, obviously he has an arc, versus it comes to his attitude toward the divine right of kings, then no. I mean, he never wavers. He goes from I can do whatever I want because I'm the king, to, you know, lamenting that he's the victim. And you know, the famous monologue, it's on our wheel that we do every Saturday. I have compared this prison to I can't remember, but that's a good where he's reflecting on what happened to him. And you know, that's the other thing that I think why, besides what I said earlier about I like, because it's the first part of seeing Bolingbroke's fascinating arc that you have to watch the next two plays in the tetralogy to see paid off. The reason this is good in its own right is I think it's a fascinating look at the controversial thing about the analyzing the divine right of kings, you know, showing how people believe that. And he's very good where he shows both, Shakespeare shows both sides of that. He shows the apparent contradictions in that. I think the character, the Duke of York, that one of the uncles of the king and Bolingbroke, I think that's a fascinating character because, well, it shows the irony about how first, if you look at the character, you know, the monologue to Bolingbroke for the grace me no grace, nor uncle me no uncles, I am no traitor's uncle, you know, saying you're a traitor, divine right of kings, you know, God has chosen Richard to be your king. You're rebelling against God. By rebelling against him, you're rebelling against God. And that's the same character who in Act 4 or 5, now when his own son is loyal to Richard and wants to put him back and throw it, no, God has chosen Bolingbroke to be your king. You are to rebel against him is to rebel against God. Same character. And I'm sure Shakespeare understood the irony as well, even though he lived in a time that they still more or less believed in divine right of kings. You know, I'm sure Shakespeare appreciated the irony himself and wanted you to see that. So, what'd you say?
It was a time of enlightenment. It was Shakespeare living in a time where they were transforming from the superstition, the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, to an era of enlightenment. This was sort of part of that transition, I think.
Well, I think that this is a recurrent theme in Shakespeare. So who should rule? Should it be the one that is born a king, or the one that is more capable? And we see this juxtaposition of those two types of leaders in Richard II. So Bolingbroke is allegedly the better leader because he's more determined. But on the other hand, he's also an usurper, so he doesn't have the legal right to rule according to the traditions of the era. And Richard II is portrayed as a little bit pusillanimous, if you will, and he just takes whatever he needs to do whatever he wants, and this makes all people angry. And so when he is deposed, he goes to prison and he starts reflecting on what he has done and what has happened. And we see that he's actually a very smart person. So, and
that makes him an interesting character.
Yeah,
but again, the contrast between he thinks what's being done to him is unjust, whereas he never stops to think that he's done some unjust things.
During the play, first he said that not all the waters in the sea can wash off the bounds of an anointed king, and later on he says, "With my own hand, I wash my bounds off," or something similar. So when he was about to give his crown to Bolingbroke, and I believe he changes a little bit. At least his perspective is changed when he goes to prison, because he's very proud. He's very cocky at the beginning of the play, but then he says that he can never be content. And there's a nice quote. Let me find it. Nor I, nor any man. Yeah, so, but whatever I be, no I nor any man but man is, with nothing shall be pleased till he be eased with being nothing. So no person can be happy or truly content until the same person becomes nothing or dies. Or in other words, we always want what we don't have. Do you see my screen well, by the way, or should I zoom?
Yeah, I can see.
Okay.
I can see it.
All right.
I think there's so much of what Richard says is subjective. I mean, he's saying this about himself, but he's sort of projecting it and applying it to everyone, which makes, again, he makes it a very interesting character. We see this person who, and this is why Shakespeare probably gives him all this his how his process of dealing with what happened to him. And when people sometimes when something totally unexpected happens to them, it sort of projects, like they say, well, everybody should have it. It's very healthy, like, which isn't true. Not everybody deserves to have another perspective. And we see Richard say, well, this should happen to everybody. Yeah. And nobody's happy. Just because he's not happy, because he's being denied the one thing that gives his life meaning, which is the throne.
Yeah, in his soliloquy. Yeah, his soliloquy.
I think it's interesting that Shakespeare gives it a lot of civil.
All right. So we are not really on the same page whether he's the same person or not, to summarize. Well, there isn't that dramatic a change, but I believe that he rethinks some of his views. So compare him when he took all the possessions of Bolingbroke without even considering it.
Does he ever really accept Bolingbroke as his successor? Does he ever really accept Bolingbroke as his successor, as his rightful successor?
He's forced to. He doesn't have a choice, but.
Well, he's not forced to accept anything. He can just go to the gallows and say, I don't recognize him as king. I accept him as king.
Yeah, but given the choice to die or to accept something, what would you do?
Yeah, being forced to yield and forced. I think the question is does he accept it in his heart? I think he never does. But it's the deposition scene. You know, he says, look, I don't have a choice. I'll give you the crown, but he makes it very clear when he goes, you're fine. I have no choice, but you're the one that's going against the law of God and making me say what I'm. But
he even goes further to claim that he's better than a king, because when he was a king, subjects were flattering him, whereas now Bolingbroke, who was the current king, was flattering him. It was.
Well, he's a sort of all bargaining. And say, well, that's not the thing. He takes one of the way, but he's screwed. That's
yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's proceed with the next one then. Try to find evidence against the view that Richard is self-centered. I assume we're supposed to find this evidence before the disposition.
I would answer that question by saying about not him specifically, but all kings who cling to that belief in divine right of kings, the idea that it's not just for the sake of my power, it's because God doesn't just want me to be powerful, but it's about he's chosen me to take care of the people, and it sounds selfish, of course, but to those who really believed in the idea of divine right of kings are saying by going against God's chosen representative, you're hurting his people, because the fact I would say the actual evidence in the text, it's paid off more at the end of this tetralogy, in Henry V's Upon the King monologue. I've even used that when I was a history teacher in teaching my students the concept of divine right of kings. It was not English, but I was teaching history by making them analyze that speech, how he's talking about the responsibilities the king has it's not just about his power, it's also about with great power comes great responsibility. And Richard doesn't show that as much as Henry does later on, but he's still at the heart of why he says it's an outrage what Bolingbroke is doing. It's not just an offense against me, it's an offense against the people that I've been chosen to take care of. And I think he says, where is God, in the speech he makes to Bolingbroke just before he says, show me the hand of God that hath dismissed us from our stewardship. He doesn't say from my power, from the choice of words, stewardship is what really stands out. He says, you're not, again, it's not me, it's I'm doing my part of taking care of the people, and it's not just me that's the victim of what you're doing, Bolingbroke, it's the people that I take care of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's also something that is less profound, namely at the very beginning of the play we have Bolingbroke and Mauro, or what was the name of the other guy? So Bolingbroke was supposed to fight another person.
Mowbray, yeah.
Mowbray. And then the king suddenly decided, okay, let's just banish them. And this is an unselfish act. So in the past, I believe that during this time, having public fights and executions was considered like watching TV today. So they didn't have that many entertainment opportunities. And they were staging all sorts of tournaments, and they had public executions and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And technically, this would have been something interesting to watch, because Bolingbroke and Mowbray were probably very good fighters. But this is something small; it's nothing compared to what Mark said. How early in the play does Bolingbroke decide to aim at the crown, take account of other people's comments, as well as of Bolingbroke's own words and actions? Well, I discovered some foreshadowing regarding this. I want to find one. Yeah. So this is a speech by Bolingbroke, and he says, "O thou, the earthly author of my blood." So we had this dichotomy of being this idea of the divine right. So the king was technically a son of God, and at the same time he also had an earthly father. And this happens early on in the scene. In the play, so it is before Bolingbroke was officially against King Richard II, and we see this, the earthly author of my blood, and this suggests that apart from an earthly author, he also has another kind of author, maybe a divine one. And this is, so I don't know which act and scene is this. Let's find out. So scene 3, it's very early. Okay. Maybe act 2? No, act 1. Act 1, scene 3.
I would think
this foreshadowing
would be very early on.
Let's go back to the question. But this is maybe just something used by Shakespeare. So Bolingbroke doesn't really aim to depose the king at this stage, not yet. The biggest, the point of no return is basically when Bolingbroke is dispossessed by the king. First we have he's being angry at being Bolingbroke's being angry for being banished for 6 years, and then the dispossession is what?
There is the fact that when he first, I think the scene with the Duke of York, when it calls him a traitor that I referred to earlier, when he specifically mentions, I was banished as Hereford, I come for Lancaster, you know, where it's twofold. It's not just that he's saying, you know, he took the dukedom of Lancaster away from me, and that's why I'm returning. I was banished as a Duke of Hereford, not of Lancaster. That's why I'm not rebelling. But he also, the other side of that coin is he's saying, I'm not aiming for the crown. All I want is my dukedom that that Richard has taken unjustly from me. And so it does make it clear that early on, he isn't actually aiming at the crown. He just wants his dukedom. But that's a good question, because it is really it's kind of unclear about at what exact point does he move from that position, all he wants is his dukedom of Lancaster, to he is actually willing to take the crown.
Oh, this is one of the many brilliant things that you can find in Shakespeare. So he tries to show you different perspectives and tries intentionally not to give you the right answer. He wants you to think about whatever is happening. So there was one critic that said that the genius of Shakespeare lies in his ability to show without contradictory views of virtually anything he's showing you.
Absolutely, the antithesis. You know, he tried the showing both sides. That's I think that's also what you just read is. That's kind of the reason why the one that we did last weekend is one of Shakespeare's least successful plays, is the fact that, you know, his genius is the fact that he always shows both sides of it. When it comes to Henry VIII, when it comes to the Tudors, you know, he wrote, well, that ridiculous thing, which we know is so totally untrue, that they hailed Elizabeth, oh, she's going to be a great ruler. No, he was pissed off that she wasn't a boy when she was born, you know, but the idea is it shows why one of his worst plays is the one where he was not at liberty to do what you were just saying is what makes him great, is that he shows both sides of it. He wasn't at liberty to show both sides. He had to be unquestioningly, no, King Henry was absolutely right to divorce at Catherine to give birth to the person who's on the throne while I'm writing my plays.
Yeah. And do you know how that play was originally called, Henry VIII? All is true. Sorry,
what'd you say?
All is true.
All is true.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
This is the original title of the play.
Wow.
And critics also fight a lot over it. So some people hate it and say, okay, this was 100% written by a Fletcher, so there's no point in even analyzing it. And others love it and say, no, this is pure Shakespearean. Let's analyze everything. And there are others that are somewhere in between. There's a lot of uncertainties there, but Richard II was written by Shakespeare, so that is not contended. Okay, let's move on. Oh, Vincent, would you like to add anything?
Well, just thinking about Bolingbroke. I mean, how far was he prepared to go? I mean, it wouldn't just to say that. Well, I'm going to go back and tell the king to restore what he took away from me. Like, what did he expect? How did he expect the king to react to that? Did he expected, and for him to so he knew he would have had to have some sort of leverage in order to reclaim his title. And I suspect that he was prepared from the get-go to usurp the throne if he had to, because short of that, how was he going to theoretically get his title back?
We also see not really divine intervention, but what fate does, or what chance does. So had King Richard II been returned one day earlier, he would have had 10 or 12,000 more soldiers. So this is an example of a really bad luck. So this is it. 12,000, yeah. So one day too late. So this is the condition.
Well, that would have it always depends on how good a general he might have been on the battlefield. It doesn't. That usually depends more on leadership than on numbers. So again, he might be making more excuse or Salisbury. But on a battlefield, I wouldn't think much of his chances against Bolingbroke. Because again, Bolingbroke was.
Oh, this is another Shakespearean thing. So the real King Richard was actually a good general.
Okay.
But Shakespeare chose basically, Shakespeare took Holinshed's Chronicles and some other sources and decided what to include in this play. So he didn't want. His idea wasn't to create a history play. He wasn't aiming at something like Discovery Channel. He wants something that could allow him to be an artist. So he selectively chose what to include. All right, next one. The characters of old John of Gaunt and his brother York, the one stern and foreboding, the other honest, good-natured, doing all for the best, and therefore doing nothing, are well kept up. Develop this comparison. So John of Gaunt is Bolingbroke's father, and York is his uncle, the one that wanted Bolingbroke to kill his son, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, exactly.
I would kind of question about just how different they really are when you consider the fact that I think the question assumes when it says stern and foreboding, it's referring to his great monologue he has, his dying speech and so forth, condemning Richard. The fact that is it really because he, unlike his brother, is willing to question the idea of blind loyalty to the king on the basis of divine right, or is it simply because he's a dying man who no longer has anything to lose because in pissing off the king? Because remember, it was actually him in the second scene with the Duchess of Gloucester. That's a great scene where he basically reiterates the same point that his brother was making when she's saying, my husband, the Duke of Gloucester, was murdered. Richard is guilty of it. And he says, he basically reiterates the point of divine right of kings, the fact, well, God chose him to rule, but he also, the other side of the coin is what we were saying, why God chose him to rule, but by the same token, he's going to have a lot more to answer for when he stands before God someday. That's the downside of being chosen by God to rule, that I talk about with my students when it comes to the Henry V upon the king monologue. And so in that, he definitely shows it. So he definitely shows a side of himself that the younger brother doesn't with that dying monologue. He shows the similar side in that scene with the Duchess of Gloucester, the same attitude toward divine right of kings. But as to whether or not we don't get to see the Duke of York's death scene, maybe on his deathbed, maybe he would be at liberty to say how he really feels, and so how different are they really? It's kind of it's a mystery based on the conditions of not seeing one on his deathbed and not seeing the other that way.
It's not just the deathbed. Also, Gaunt's son was banished. So we have two dramatic events, whereas in the case of York, it is actually the opposite. So he wanted his son to be killed, which is ridiculous, at least from today's point of view. But see what Gaunt says. But that thy kingdom cannot buy my bread. So this is something brave to say to a king, I believe. And good-natured, doing all for the best, and therefore doing nothing. This is kind of a nice description. So what does he do? He welcomes Bolingbroke. He welcomes him to his castle, and then he decides to become his man. And because his son is still rooting for Richard II, he decides to kill his son, or to have his son killed, which is kind of weird. But when I watched the Globes version of this play, the Globes performance of this play, the scene with York, his wife, and Bolingbroke was hilarious. So at least this is how they performed it. Maybe. Yeah, and the way woman working 20 times my son, I want to teach him. And Gaunt he basically dies because his son is banished. He becomes sick. It's the exact opposite. Even though they're brothers. Examine the.
Well, what can you do? What could any of the nobility do during a dynastic war? You just basically have to sit back and wait to see who wins, and unless you're pressed as to take a side. I think that's the best thing to do, is nothing, unless you're approached by either side. You got to make a judgment call, and this is of course a very goes to show you, Shakespeare, the dramatist, it's much more dramatic to go against your own son. And you have to choose between your son and your king, and the hell of a choice. And if you know about
but he could have tried to convince his son to not proceed, because this is his only child, and his wife is beyond childbirth age. So this is it for him.
Well, again, I think that goes to, again, if he's just returning for any reason to reclaim anything, he's probably, I would think, he's prepared to go all the way. And he's such the king, and he probably knew the king well, and he knew his son well, and he just saw this train wreck coming. And he probably thought there's no talking about it. It was the second he crossed the Rubicon. I mean, that's what it means to cross the Rubicon. It's like once he re-entered the country, once he decided to challenge the king, there was no going back. And maybe he was thinking as a chess, 2 chess moves ahead, like, well, I think my son's going to lose, and I have to express loyalty, at least not oppose the king. So
express loyalty now, as Mark mentioned earlier.
Yes.
So examine the character of Queen Isabel and her function in the play. So they do have their final kiss with Richard.
Yeah, they have a good scene where he's going off into the dungeon, but I always thought that we see so little of her before that. She isn't developed, and I don't know that that's really a flaw per se, because you could have, Shakespeare could have written a whole different play about the relationship between husband and wife here, and there's a reason that relationship gives short shrift here, because it's not, the play really isn't about his relationship with his wife, it's about his relationship with his cousin. But yeah, I don't, that's a character that is not very well fleshed out here. I mean, I said maybe she could have a different play written with her as the focus, but
I don't even remember her. And I usually remember Shakespeare's female characters.
Yeah, you only barely. Well, like I think all of Shakespeare's history plays, well, all of his plays, but the history plays especially, are very male dominated for obvious reasons.
But the female characters, it's not so much quantity as quality. They usually have at least one or two really good scenes, and Margaret has a lot of great scenes in the later ones.
Oh yeah, Margaret's a great character,
and even Portia and yeah, Portia and Brutus's wife, they have only one scene apiece, but those are great scenes. Whereas, again, I don't even remember. I barely remember.
Yeah, I think it's very telling that you don't remember her. I mean, she is kind of a throwaway character. I mean, where everybody makes cuts to. I could even see a production of this where her character is cut completely. You don't even, that you go right to where he's in his prison cell, because again, they don't. Well, he has a wife, he has a relationship with her, but that's really not what the play is about. So it's telling that even though he writes her into the play, Vincent doesn't even remember her. Because she does not get very much character development from Shakespeare.
That goes for all women in this play. If I remember correctly from the Arden Shakespeare edition of the play, there are only 3-point-something% of female lines in this play. This is the least the Shakespeare play with the least number of female lines. So the second play, the play with, so all the other plays have at least 9% female lines. This one has 3-point-something. So there are basically almost no women involved. But be that as it may, we have one relatively good scene. So when they say their goodbyes. So maybe this is used there to show that King Richard can laugh, or let's go to this scene. Isabel. We should call something else. Queen, maybe? Queen. Okay. Plus we have this gardening scene.
Yeah, that's the one. She has a decent scene there. The fact that she tells the gardener, she overhears the gardener telling how her husband's been overthrown, and she ends with, it's a good line for telling me this news of woe. I hope the plants you plant may never grow. But again, the scene doesn't. It's a good scene, but you could cut the scene entirely, and most productions do. In fact, you could cut that scene and you wouldn't lose any of the plot. So. Yeah, she still doesn't get developed as a character. She responds in anger, but to find out her husband's been deposed, but not anything different from the way anybody would react when they find someone in their family has been removed from power. Yeah. It doesn't really develop a character.
You have a point. So she's there for the sake of being there. Okay. Examine the attitudes to loyalty and to rebellion expressed by different characters in the play. So,
well, again, it goes back to like the judgment calls in a dynastic war. You better be on the winning side, or else you're gonna.
Yeah, I think I jumped the gun. I kind of answered this question already by all of the stuff I was saying about the Duke of York, the irony of his statements on. Divine Right of Kings, before and after Bolingbroke was found to be on the winning side.
I believe that there are several layers or several levels that we can see here. So we have the loyalty and rebellion towards the king or towards authority, but we have the same thing in the family. Have a look at York's family. What do we have there? The Duchess is loyal to her son, or basically to her family, whereas the Duke of York isn't. He rebels, in a way.
I mean, again, a matter of expedience. I mean, you see the writing on the wall. And
See, the Duke of York is both a rebel and a loyal person. So he's loyal towards the new king. He was a rebel towards the old king, and now he's a rebel towards his son and his wife.
he's he's a pragmatist, I think. His Shakespeare's novels are very pragmatic. And I think again that comes from being I was watching documentary. I was watching a few documentaries on what's called really the Wars of the Roses. It was actually several wars, and so again you have this constant turmoil and instability, and you have to keep making decisions. Again, if you're at that. That's the privilege of the responsibility of the nobility is again choosing the right person to be loyal to, or else you'd lose your head and you'd lose your property and all of that. It was I would assume it was very difficult to be a noble during the Wars of the Roses.
Okay. If a single word could be found to describe the structure of Richard II, it would be balance. It would be balance. Consider the structure of the play from this point of view.
I'm a little confused by that question.
I think we've been discussing the balance between pragmatism and loyalty, the balance between loyalty to one king and one's family, the balance between divine right of kings and the not so divine right of kings, the contrast between competent leadership and incompetent leadership. It's full of contrast. And I will say this again. I will say this. It's a very rich play. It's very rich characters. Then, of course, all these contrasts, of course, make for good drama.
I believe that the main point here is that we don't have a villain like in other plays. We don't have somebody that's only good. So all characters have both good and bad sides.
That's what I was saying earlier about what's the mastery of Shakespeare. Why, with the exception of his one of his least popular plays, where he does make it melodrama. The difference between tragedy versus melodrama. The melodramas of the 19th century, that we look in those as so bad because melodrama is always just cardboard characters, good guy, bad guy. So, and I mean, it can be interesting, but it's always more interesting when the characters are nuanced and you can see good and bad sides to both of them. And you don't take a strong stand on one guy was definitely on the right side and the other guy is the villain. You know, and I think balance. Henry VIII stands out as the opposite. It is, no, he's right to marry Anne Boleyn because she gives birth to the great Queen Elizabeth that I wrote my plays under, and the people that stood in the way of that marriage were the villains. It's not just that it's not true, but it's one side. I think that comes back to the balance that there. I don't know about saying that this play specifically. I would say most of his plays have that kind of balance, which is part of his greatness.
Yeah, have a look at A Midsummer Night's Dream, for example. Not only do you not have a protagonist, you don't even have a group of people that are a protagonist. So you have four main sets of characters. You have the artisans, the fairies, the rulers, and the lovers. And they all developed
that way. That's interesting.
More or less.
Four groups, yeah. I hadn't thought of that way. That's interesting.
No, that was ingenious.
And have a look at the following two plays. So King Henry IV, parts 1 and 2. Who is the main character? So it depends on how you act it. It could easily be Falstaff, so the rise and fall of Falstaff. It could be Prince Harry or Henry V, if you want it to be. It can't really be King Henry IV, I believe, because he doesn't do that much. But again, you can interpret it in different ways. you don't have an obvious main character. And here, Bolingbroke and Richard are both very well developed. Okay, next one. Examine the references in the play to blood, the sun, breath, water. What is the effect of these references? Well, there's quite a lot of them.
I think I might have to see
In
some
order to answer
specific
this, you
lines
have
to
to
know what
reread
this is
the
talking
play. We could
about.
skip this question if you want.
Oh,
I just want to
you don't have any
mention
rain
that
yet?
sun is a typical pun on sun, so sun and sun. So you're like a child, and also the star that gives us light. So Shakespeare often plays on those words. Or we can answer just the second part of the question. Because it
Do
doesn't.
you have any lines that you could pull up as examples?
Yeah, that would help. But that's what I was saying.
If you give me some minutes to find it in my Art and Shakespeare, because it was written about it.
It goes to the poetry of Shakespeare.
It was imagery somewhere. Imagery, major themes, page 55. Language style. All right. I just Google. Just search for breath. Oh, 30 times breath. Have a look. So which breathed this poison, made him a man, and though thou livest and breathest, but lest the young and cheery drawing breath, draws the sweet infant breath of gentle sleep. Breathing native breath. So breath had several meanings back then. One was obviously to inhale and exhale, but it was also to say something, to utter. And in this line, breathing native breath means speaking my mother tongue.
Breathing native breath. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and Shakespeare uses this meaning quite frequently. To breathe something means to say something in his language. But actually, in his language, everything means several things at the same time. But particularly about breath. The breath of kings. And in a word, such is the breath of kings. So this is the power of kings. And this is so another meaning, power. But that the kingdom cannot buy my breath. So this is my life. Fourth meaning so far. To breathe, the abundant dollar of the heart. Well, when the tongue's office should be prodigal, to breathe, you know, it was dollar. A state of great sorrow or distress. Okay. Basically, here this word is doesn't really have an additional meaning. So, when the tongue's office should be prodigal, to breathe the abundant dollar of the heart. Oh, to express. Here it means to express. So, further meaning. Will the king come that I may breathe my last? So it is at the same time to have his last breath and also to say his last words. Vex not yourself, not strive not with your breath, for all in vain comes counsel to his ear. So here he means his speech. For they breathe their words in pain. So they say the truth, those people that speak when they're in pain. This breath thou lackst, and that breath wilt thou lose. Okay, direct not him whose way himself will choose. Who says this? York. So, well, that mutiny. Okay, that is not quickly bust into his ears. What does it mean, this? What does this mean? This breath thou lackst, and that breath wilt thou lose.
Probably referring to I think that's like, I will fight you with my last breath, you know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then with my his dying breath, they're referring to. I think just it's an analogy to having life in you still, and using the strength you've still got in you.
So this life here, so this power,
I don't know
strength.
if this or any of those other words that are in the question, if they really reflect a theme, or
well,
if there's I think they're just a figurative way of saying something that was common in Shakespeare's day, or in his style of writing, or both. But the question tries to imply that there's some kind of that the words have some kind of a bigger
meaning,
a bigger meaning than that. I don't know that I agree with it. I think it's the way of talking. It's the way of expressing something.
Well, that's the thing. So if we were to read the entire play carefully, we could find a lot of words that are similar to blood, sun, breath, and water, and also further themes. And this abundance of such words makes you subconsciously think of particular things. So this is what even some less amazing authors try to do. So for example, Stephen King. So I don't consider him the greatest author of all time, but he usually does the following. So he writes a book, and after the first draft, he stops thinking about it, and he resumes working on it after several weeks. And he says, "All right, so apparently I have this theme here in my book. Let's use some further words to amplify it." And Shakespeare has done the same, but much more skillfully. So he wants us to think about blood, the sun, breath, and water. So what is blood? Blood is you have something hereditary. So the king is the son of the previous king, usually. You also have the blood that runs in a family. So you have family relationships. You have, what else does blood signify? During war, so it's massacre, violence. What else is blood the symbol of?
Well, blood also is life.
Of life, exactly, yeah. And what about the sun? So the sun is constant. It always rises every day. It gives you light, and then it sets. So constancy or tradition.
The sun also gives life.
It gives life, yeah. What about breath? So we've already found 5 or 6 meanings of breath. And this is just of this word in particular. So there must be other words that are similar to breath, but that cannot be found just by searching for breath.
Well, all of these things can signify life. I mean, blood, breath, the sun, and water, they're all essential for life.
But water has something else, so a washing off the bounds.
What?
The bounds of the king. So he says that not all the water in the Red Sea can wash off the bounds of an anointed king. And then later on he says, with my own hands, I wash off my bounds, or something similar. But let's try to find it with my hand. With my own. I can't find it. But is it bounds? Not all the water in the rough root sea can wash the balm off from an anointed king. And later on, with mine own tears, I wash away my bound. Okay, tears, not hand. With my own hands, I give away my crown. With my own tongue, deny my sacred state. With my own breath, release all duteous oaths. So another breath, uttering. This figure of speech, wherein you begin every line in a similar vein, is called anaphora, by the way. With my own, with my own, and so on. Right. What are the functions of rhyme in Richard II? Why does Act 5, Scene 3 contain such a high proportion of rhyming lines? So I usually skip scene-related questions because I don't remember what happens in this scene in particular, but we could answer it if you want. We can go and check.
Yeah,
so what are the
I
functions
looked
of
up
rhyme?
what scene it was when I saw it, and I'm kind of confused. I don't know that it has any specific reason for that scene more than it's the one where the Duke of York is showing the changeover where he says that my son has betrayed Bolingbroke. Now he deserves to die, while his wife is pleading with Bolingbroke to spare O'Merle's life. I don't know. So that was I looked it up just when I saw that was a question coming up, but I didn't know anything specific about that scene, or if anybody thinks. But just in general, the fact that he, writing in poetry, and I also heard somewhere that even scenes where they don't have a lot of rhyming couplets, the tendency to end a scene in a rhyming couplet, that was an old literary device in the days when set design wasn't very elaborate, and they just tell is that ending a scene in a rhyming cut, that was a way to tip the audience off to the fact that this is the end of the scene, and the next line that's spoken were in a totally different location, even though the scenery doesn't change much. So that's what I heard was like he often writes where whole scenes are in rhyming couplets, or using it more often, like the question says about Act 5, Scene 3. But that I heard was something Shakespeare didn't make up. It was a standard routine at the time to have the last two lines of a scene be a rhyming couplet for that purpose of letting the. But I don't know about if there's any real reason why some scenes have more rhymes than others. If there's a reason for that, if we can.
Cannot think of any. There's another peculiarity of this play. It doesn't have any verse at all, which is unusual for Shakespeare. But maybe he just wanted to do it like this. I mean, he was the artist. He could do whatever he wanted, right? Or almost.
Well, basically, I mean, yes, if he decided, yes, I don't want to do this play in verse, it would work. It would work either way. So
yeah.
He just probably decided to work better without verse.
I also heard not necessarily rhymes, but whether or not he writes in verse or prose, it's not an exact match, but usually the standard was that upper class characters always speak in verse and lower class characters always speak in prose, which is, you see the class bias of the time and everything. However, I've heard also that from our perspective, that seems so elitist, the fact that the lower class characters have to be written in the inferior version. But in Shakespeare's time, if anything, the fact that he portrayed lower class characters at all was a tribute to his inclusiveness, that other writers at the time would just say they wouldn't give lines at all to servant characters. They would like the gardeners, like that's that scene that I mentioned where it could be cut easily. You would still follow the plot, but it's a way of showing how do the common folk relate to what's just happened, and lesser writers would only focus on the kings and dukes and the royalty, and the fact that even though the scene could easily be cut, we'd still understand the play. It shows his common touch and so forth that he writes them, and I don't know if because he would write them without verse or without rhyme, if that says anything more. But again, just the fact that he's including these characters at all is is an interesting touch to.
Well, like all good writers of dialogue, he had a good ear. I don't know if he was being elitist, he was just reproducing how people talk. People of the nobility talk a certain way, people of the peasantry talk another way. And I think the way he fleshed out the characters, as Alexander pointed out, whether they be mechanics or even fairies or sprites or what have you, they all had their own complexities and quirks and wisdom. He would put on separate shows the wisdom of the working class and the foolishness of the nobility. He doesn't have, I think he's very fair. I think it's because he had a good ear. And if it came out verse or prose, it just came out that way. Because as a writer myself, I know it's a matter of listening and then reproducing what you hear, as opposed to trying to control it, trying to. The worst writing is the most worst dialogue is usually the dialogue that's really doesn't ring true. Is what sounds forced or generic.
Yeah, but on the other hand, who talks like Shakespeare?
It's stylized. Certainly, it's stylized, but I think there's a ring of there's an authenticity about it. In fact, I mean, if you want to go all the way, the nobility until what was it? Like the beginning of the 19th century, almost all the royalty of England spoke French. Everyone at court spoke French, and he throws in French here and there. But I think somebody pointed out, pig farmers went to see his plays, and as well as nobles, and I think that's because if he had depicted either class in an authentic way, he wouldn't have been as popular. I just think he had a very good ear. He was provincial. He was from a province. He wasn't from, and yet he spent a better part of his life in a city, but a city that was very diverse and the people who lived there. And I just think he was soaking in all of this diversity, and that's shown in his plays.
Okay. Consider the part played in Richard II by rituals and ceremonies. So
again, that goes to changing the guard, to make it legal, to make it legitimate. There's all sorts of ceremony in that. I think that's an integral part of choosing power.
Yeah, the anointment of the king is actually very important, and not only in this play.
Recognize the recognition of the church.
Yeah. Rituals and ceremonies. Okay. Some critics call Richard II a history play, while others call it a tragedy. Discuss the difference between the two types and say which category you consider the more appropriate for Richard II. I think it's a little bit of both.
It could be both. I mean, Julius Caesar is considered a tragedy, and yet it's always never lumped in with the history. It was not long after Shakespeare's death that the plays were categorized.
Yeah, and it's the fact that in many ways we do a disservice by insisting on classifying plays one way or the other, because even if you take today, I mean. History can be today when we write a play, we don't call it a history. I mean, history can be or anything could be the inspiration for it, but does it have a happy ending or a sad ending? That could apply to whatever the genre is. So that's a separate, but it has, even if we take out history plays, the genre as being how we classify it, we just stick to tragedy versus comedy. You see that constantly in Shakespeare's works, the fact that even the bleakest tragedies have genuinely funny moments in them. They just have a tragic ending. And even the comedies have some pretty grim stuff in it. like Much Ado About Nothing is a funny play. It has a happy ending, everything, but God, what happens to hero in between? That's hardly a laughing. Those. So I mean, that's another thing I think would say is a tribute to Shakespeare's greatness. Other writers at the time might have known when they're right. I am writing a tragedy. It has to stick to this format. No, I am writing a comedy. I can't have, the not feeling the need to limit yourself. I mean, that's.
I think we've already established that, and Shakespeare would agree that he certainly didn't stick to history in his history plays. I mean,
of course.
He had to make Richard III out to be this ogreish person, even though he was not. Because it goes back to, as you say, like Henry VIII, the audience he was writing for. And he would have been probably the first to say, of course, I take license. It's what's going to work. It's going to play on stage. As you call him. I mean, to even imply that he's a historian is really an insult to historians, and I think he would agree with that.
How much history can you find in King Henry IV Part 2, for example? There's barely anything history-related going on there.
And he wrote the plays out of order. That's another thing. These plays were produced all out of order. It was a matter of, I guess, what was appropriate for that particular season.
Okay. Many critics have commented on the unity of tone and atmosphere in Richard II. How is this unity produced? Unity of tone and atmosphere?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, what happens? I mean, what's happening is a civil war, and once that's been, and then the catalyst, if you will, or even the antagonist, being Richard, who sets off the civil war. Once that is ignited, it simply snowballs and stays on the same path. It's pretty straightforward, and I think that's good. That allowed Shakespeare to throw in so many rich characters in the play, because you don't have to worry. You know where the plot is going, and you know what's going to happen. So you can really lose yourself in the richness of the characters.
Do you have anything to add, Mark?
Yeah, I'm a little, I'm kind of, that question's kind of confusing to me about unity of tone and that, because if it, I don't know, I guess maybe what they mean by it is the fact that it contradicts what I was saying, where I said that it has most of his plays are not strictly tragedy, or we said, we agreed in the last question it has elements of history and tragedy, and I said a lot of between the histories and the comedies they combine categories of tragedy and comedy. I can't really think of anywhere that comedy comes in. So the fact that there's no comedic element, or at least none that comes to mind, compared to the next two plays in the tetralogy, which introduce Falstaff, that's obviously not true that they leave comedy out. So I don't know. Maybe that's what the question means. That the unity means it's consistently a serious play. There is not a heck of a lot of comedic elements in it. Maybe that's what they mean by, I don't know if that's what they mean by the unity of tone. And
well, I can come up with one counterexample. So in the Globe's production, the scene where everybody's begging the king either to kill York's son or not to kill him is portrayed very funny. So I laughed a lot when I watched it. But this might be just because the director of this performance decided to make it funny. It's not necessarily in the text. But wait, it is in the text. Wait, let's find it. So Bolingbroke says that what is something serious becomes a game of something. What was this? This was Act 5. We've established that it's Act 5, Scene 3. Scene 3. Okay. No. King Henry. Henry. Okay, our scene is altered from a serious thing and now changed to the beggar and the king. So Shakespeare probably did intend it as a funny scene.
I'm gonna leave right now and go get my package and I'll come back.
Let's wait for Mark.
Excuse me for just a second.
But anyhow, we can continue to the next question. Go through the play looking for examples of rhetorical patterning, A, rhetorical patterning, B, wordplay. Oh, it's the whole play, basically. But which characters use the most? What effects do they have in the play? So the more noble you are, the more sophisticated language you use in Shakespeare. And I can show you an example from this play. Yeah. So this one is in this line we have a beggar begs that never begged before. So we have the root beg, and we have 3 different suffixes attached to it. This is called polyptoton or polyptoton. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. So when you have different suffixes or different affixes, actually, they can also be prefixes attached to the same root. And Shakespeare uses it a lot. And it need not be in one line or one sentence. It can be even throughout the whole play. And then we have the deathbed speech of Gaunt. Where's Gaunt? Okay, so we have this. This is a very long sentence wherein the word "this" appears about 20 times. So this once, again. So this creates suspense. So he keeps enlisting things. This, and then at the very end, I die. Is now leased out. I die pronouncing it. So it's a very dramatic sentence. But I don't know whether you're interested in analyzing text at the word level, on a word level.
Yes. I mean, I don't know where Mark went, but
well, we could then we can analyze this one if you want. Okay, so this royal throne of kings, this sceptered isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars. So here we have a lot of metaphors. So the land itself is not a throne, but it's the throne is seen as a synecdoche of the land, because this is where the throne of the king is.
Right.
This sceptered isle. So kings had scepters, and this goes all the way to Homer's world. Actually, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, you see many people holding scepters when they talk, and the tradition remains. And isle. So it is not technically a small isle. It's a huge island, but he tries to diminish it. This earth of majesty, this seat of Mars. So Mars was the god of war. It's very metaphorical. It's other Eden. So the other heaven, basically. Demi-paradise, half paradise. A fortress built by nature for herself. This is called personification. So nature is capitalized, and it means that it's conceived of as a living thing.
Well, you refer to her as herself as opposed to himself.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Yeah,
I think what's interesting, I'm thinking of the actual throne of England, which I've seen. It's a very simple looking wooden chair. It's not opulent in any way. You know, if you've ever seen the actual throne of England. And here we have Shakespeare describing it in such epic terms. And I always felt the lists when he has them speaking in lists, the sceptred isle, the seat of Mars. I think he's giving the actors a chance to explore the words and to hit different notes and to construct this. I think he does that for the actors. I really do. And to paint a picture for the actors, you allow the actors to paint a picture for the audience. You get it. You look at the throne of England. It's a very simple wooden chair.
It's so patriotic if you're English.
What do you mean, Sarge?
It is very patriotic if you're English.
Yes, but again, the contrast, the way he's describing it in contrast to its physical appearance is I think, very interesting. The contrast, and then describing it from a simple wooden chair, which it is.
And every line is metaphorical.
Yes.
Against infection and the hand of war. So infection is basically the enemies, against the enemies.
Yes.
The hand
Who's
of
speaking
war.
Who's talking?
This little world, again little, so we have just isle instead of island, we have little world, this precious stone, it becomes even tinier, set in the silver sea, which serves it all the office of a wall. So the sea is like a wall, or as a moat defensive to a house. So again, it's not really a house, it's much, much, much bigger. But
then he puts it in a small island. It's this big thing in a small island.
Against the envy of less happier lands, this blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England, finally England. But this nurse, this teeming womb of royal kings, feared by their breed and famous by their birth. So they're feared just because they're kings of England. They're famous because they're kings of England. So that's enough. Renowned for their deeds, as far from home for Christian service and true chivalry, as in the sepulchre in stubborn Jewry of the world's ransom, blessed Mary's son. Everything metaphorical. And then we reach the climax. It's now leased out. I die pronouncing it. Like to a tenement of pelting farm. So England that I loved all my life is not the same. It's broken, ruined by civil war, by injustice. Mark, while you were gone, we started analyzing the text that is on a sentence level, because this was kind of the next.
The question
is
sentence.
Go through the play, looking for examples of A, rhetorical pattern, and B, wordplay.
That is.
That's why we decided to.
The great monologues have plenty of both A and B in it. I mean, that would probably one of two great long monologues that have all kinds of great wordplay and rhetoric in it. John of Gaunt's speech, and also for God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. That's a great monologue. I mean, I think all of Shakespeare's great soliloquies are heavy on rhetoric and wordplay, and basically everything he writes, but there's always an extra abundance of both of those elements in a long soliloquies. So we could break down John of Gaunt's speech that we've just been looking at, and that would probably be one of the two best. The other of the two best places to look for that would be the other soliloquy that I was just referring to.
Yeah, it is. It's basically, this is everywhere. As you've said. Okay. Where was? Do you know a line from the other one so that we can analyze it? Or
around act. Let me look on the app here.
And by the way, do you like discussing And do you like the discussion so far?
Yes, it is. It's been very interesting.
I
My
enjoyed
idea
this,
is fun.
I believe it's Act 3, Scene 2.
Okay.
Yeah, Act 3, Scene 2 is where that monologue is.
Okay. King Richard.
It starts with the optimistic, all the cannot wash the bomb off an anointed king. And then when he hears more bad news, he launches into that. No matter, yeah, here it is. No matter where, of comfort no man speak. Let's talk of graves, of worms, of think about the wordplay there. Graves, all the images,
Imagery of
imagery
graves,
of the gloom and doom that he sees, and now that he's looking at his overthrow as inevitable, based on the news of Bushy, Bagot, and Green.
Rainy eyes. So
The very same scene started with a shorter, less well quoted soliloquy about, on a totally different note, the optimistic note of all the waters cannot wash the bomb off an anointed king, as he's all happy. He thinks he's been victorious, but then when he hears the more and more bad news throughout the scene, and
how many words related to dying we see here? You have graves, worms that eat you when you die, epitaphs that you put on your grave, dust, you go back to dust.
Yeah.
Rainy eyes, you cry when somebody dies. Sorrow, when you die, there's sorrow.
Taking place during
the
a war.
earth.
Taking place during a war, so you're going to think about death. But you have to,
in Hamlet, there was this great speech by Hamlet himself. He said that a king might die and a worm might eat it, and then a peasant might take the worm to fish and catch a fish and eat the fish. The fish might eat the worm, and then the peasant might eat the fish, and you have this whole circle. He also says that even Alexander the Great died, and now he might have been turned to an everyday object, and he mentioned a cask part or a barrel part. I forgot what exactly. Executors, again, this is related to killing. Wheels, again, and yet not so for bequeath. Again, then on every line, in every line we see something that's related to dying.
again, it's about war.
Yeah.
The most important part of war is killing and dying. We revere warriors, and what do the warriors do? They kill people.
Mm-hmm.
The irony of life that Shakespeare supports.
Nice. Okay. And final question. It is often said that the poetry of Richard II is lyrical. What do you understand by this, and to what extent do you think it is? Lyrical.
This, correct me if I'm wrong. We were saying about what I've seen breakdowns of each play. They say what percent is in prose versus in verse. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this is one of the few that is entirely in verse. There's not a single prose entrance into it. Maybe that is that what they mean by it's lyrical. Everything is in verse, and because in that sense, most of Shakespeare's, well, actually different. Some of the comedies, some of the comedies, are actually heavier in prose than in verse, but most of his plays have more verse than prose. But it's rare for them to be 100% in verse like this one is. So
maybe
I'm guessing that's what they mean by lyrical.
But can it be can it be lyrical and not rhyme at the same time? Doesn't
I think so. I mean, that's what blank verse is supposed to be. It's supposed to be.
So can blank verse be lyrical?
I believe so.
Okay.
Just as poetry doesn't necessarily have to rhyme.
Yeah, there's still iambic pentameter. There's still the da 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 da, where you can still that's lyrical, even if it doesn't. It's musical and lyrical, even if it doesn't rhyme.
The
The rhyming is just an extra poetic device.
Lyric poetry is a formal type of poetry which expresses personal emotions or feelings, typically spoken in the first person. Aha, okay. So I had the wrong definition in my mind. So we have this both soliloquies that we've just analyzed are written in the first person, and they're emotional. Then we have the soliloquy of Richard when he's in the tower. Okay. Then there's an appendix here. All right. We've covered 14 questions. Well done. Would you like to discuss other plays like this or other works of literature, not necessarily by Shakespeare?
You mean now, or did you mean would you like to do this
in the future?
I thought this was great. I mean, I think Vincent for hosting it, and I think Alex for having the idea. I think this worked out wonderfully, and I also liked how you had the idea of let's keep it focused on one play. Although the announcement on Facebook, I think you should have made that more clear. No, this is the one we'll be discussing, and then maybe people would know a little bit more about what to expect, and maybe more people would have joined. But yeah, I think we should make this a regular thing. And if you're willing to keep doing it, I think that's great. And we run through the plays like we do with the readings of them. We should keep going, doing one play after another. And
well, we can tackle the following plays of the Henriette. So King Henry IV, Part 1.
Okay,
that's what comes next.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And I'm not sure that I'll be available. I mean, thing is during the day and during the week. A lot of people might not be available for that reason, but
yeah, I suggested the hour because it starts at 7 p.m. for me.
Yeah, that's true.
Just because I've been also helping my friend. We're going to do a original play reading, and we scheduled it for the evenings, and people have been responsive. So I'm going to guess that for these readings like this, evenings, since most of us are in the United States, the evenings might be better.
Yeah.
Or late afternoon or somewhere around that.
What about during the weekends? But during the weekends, we already have the Wheel of Shakespeare, and every other week we have your reading already.
Yes, so
yeah, that's already enough.
Maybe let's say 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We could try.
But there's a 6-hour difference, so your 5 is my 11.
Yeah. It's difficult to make something that works for everybody.
Yeah.
And there's even a greater difference for me in LA. So but anyway, I actually need to run because I got a rush call to work on Thursday, and I got to take a COVID test now in Culver City. So yeah, I got called in for a COVID test so I can work on Thursday. But so I'm going to go. But thank you again, Vincent, for hosting this, and Alex for coming up with the idea. I'd love to do it again sometime. So. All right.
So we'll work out something. We'll work out a time, a date, and we'll let everybody know.
Okay. Well, I'll see you guys soon.
Okay, Mark.
See you.
Yeah.